I think we have to start with Fatal Attraction. I know you've done a few films before this. This wasn't your first movie, but I think Nino Cerruti came on board for this
No,
film.
no, 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 no,
No,
no, no, no, no,
not
no,
true.
no,
Oh, here we
no,
go.
no, 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 no. There is, I will just state this now so this is clear and understood. There are a number of films, Fatal Attraction, other films I think it was Fatal Attraction specifically and Wall Street, that Nino Cerruti, God bless him, may he rest in peace. He was a very, very, very great designer, a great textile artist as well. He and Michael Douglas knew each other from previous works. And for some reason or other, on Fatal Attraction, he decided, there's a thing called product placement. This is really what happened, I think. There's a thing called product placement, and they like to kind of give you whatever you want and so on and so forth. And then they use it as publicity later. This is a designer for a film. That being said, I think that we had a number of things from Nino Cerruti. Nothing worked out.
Oh.
Nothing worked out at all. There is not a stitch of clothing on Michael Douglas that is Nino Cerruti. In Basic Instinct, in Fatal Attraction, and Wall Street, nothing.
Really? Wow.
Although in his material, in his book, which I was really upset when that was published many, many years ago, because he claimed that he designed Michael's costumes, which was totally untrue.
Oh, wow.
So I'm here today on your show to tell you that Nino Cerruti has nothing to do with Michael Douglas's wardrobe on either one of those three films.
Wow. Well, we're only 5 minutes in, Ken, and we've got a world exclusive. That's gonna.
So I'm curious, were the suits and blazers, were they custom tailored? Were they bespoke? Or
in Fatal Attraction, no, nothing was in Fatal Attraction. It actually came in a way, if I remember correctly, what we began with had to change a week in, because I think that, if I remember correctly, Michael had come back from another project, and he wasn't in the shape that he wanted to be in for Fatal Attraction. And so we started, but then we, like in 5 days, changed everything. And so everything was off the rack. But of course, everything is always tailored for the actor within an inch of his life, or anybody's life for that matter, or we change it whatever way we can. But on that film, nothing was bespoke at all. Bespoke actually wasn't even I don't even think bespoke was even used in language describing how you would design a film at that moment in time.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned Wolf of Wall Street. Wall Street.
Not Wolf of Wall Street.
Not Wall Street.
There you go.
You mentioned Wall Street there. So this film had a huge impact on men sartorially, and I can just show you a picture, Ellen, of a friend of mine who's a British producer here in England. He got a shirt recently made in the style of
a horizontal stripe.
Yeah, and so I mean, it still has the echoes. Again, this look. All this time later, I guess.
I think it's a very, very handsome look for a man. I mean, and it was specifically designed for Gordon Gekko to have this elegance or romance, if you will, of a kind of a Hollywood movie star, but from the golden years, and the Duke of Windsor. So that kind of classic attitude is still, I mean, I could see it in any which way today, yesterday, tomorrow. There is a very handsome, put together feel about that particular look it is relevant now, but then it changed the face of men's fashion.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when you got that sense that you made something so iconic? Was it
Not
walking down the
somebody
street?
told me. No, not till somebody said. And when somebody said it, it was the film, I believe, opened in December of what year? I don't remember.
87, I think.
87 or 88, right? 88 maybe. And I was on a film in January that following month in January, and someone phoned from the LA Times, and the fashion editor from the LA Times phoned and said, "Do you know that there are young men in every profession of 30 years old and older, but a lot of 30-year-olds walking around looking like Gordon Gekko or wanting to be Gordon Gekko?" And he was the bad guy. So what's up? Basically. But she was totally 100. I mean, it was like the hair, the clothes, the look, all of it was so seductive for young guys that I think that's what really pushed it into the zeitgeist, to be honest. He was the villain, but he was a really, really seductive, sexy villain. And my only intention was to make sure that it was seductive in designing it before. It was, and that he looked like a movie star. I had finished a film with Michael Douglas previously, Fatal Attraction, right before, like 3 months earlier than starting Wall Street. And so we knew that he needed to be in a totally different direction than a New York lawyer. And so at that time, Wall Street and fashion, didn't exist. It didn't exist. It was it was probably as it always was from years past, and not anything specific, except braces or suspenders did come into play quite heavily in the 80s. And it came in, I think, became pronounced with, if you remember, Ivan Boesky and red suspenders.
Right.
And I think that's as far of a bold statement at that moment in our history.
Wow.
But Gordon Gekko, Gordon Gekko became somewhat of a noun instead of and an icon, yes. But it's still very, very it's still on people's top 10. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I read online, and maybe you can blow this myth out the water as well, about the people that made the shirts. I heard that Alexander Cabaz was one of the shirt makers on the film. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't.
No. But perhaps you might remember who made or tailored the suits for Michael at that time.
Alan. Now here's another one. Okay. This is, it's really kind of crazy. And throughout my career, I've tried to stop this I am a very generous person, and talent is always part of what I look for in putting things together, and so on and so forth. And I'm not protective in that way necessarily. But when someone crosses the line, as Nino Trudy did and Alan Flusser did, okay? Alan Flusser, we went to Alan Flusser because there wasn't anyone in New York. Knowing what I wanted, there wasn't anybody in New York that could produce the goods fast enough for me to put on film. And a friend suggested, had you gone to see Alan Flusser? And I said, no, but I knew who he was. It was a good idea. And we went up to see him and said, can you do this in 2 weeks? Or it was some ridiculously short time. I'll pay you. It doesn't matter. Just tell me the price. We'll give you screen credit, like a thank you and the end roll, but can you do it? And he said, after thinking about it, okay, sure. And so he agreed to make the suits. He agreed to give me everything that I needed. And I thought that his tailor shop was just all it was very like a little atelier. And I thought, oh, this is very, very good. I could bring Michael here. This would be very quiet. It's very contained. And it was all just great. And he delivered what he said he would deliver, and we put things together, and everything was quite successful until, of course, he claimed he designed the film. Later, many, 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 many years later, so I at that time, he claimed that he designed the film, and I was upset again. And I mean, I was a young designer who was, trying to make my way in the world and didn't realize how greedy people were, no pun intended. And I remember Liz Smith, a publicist that I knew, took this to Liz Smith, who was a columnist at the New York Post, I think, at that time. And something to the effect of don't invite Ellen Mirojnick and Alan Flusser to the same cocktail party. She'll kill them, because she was the one who designed Wall Street, not Alan Flusser, and something of that nature. So that was satisfying at that end. Later, when doing the Nick, so it's many years later, right? It's like 2013. I was in a factory in Brooklyn Greenfield, who were making suits for me for Clive Owen. And their dad, Mr. Greenfield, said, we've worked together before. And he was very, very, he was a very much older man, and so on. He was the dad. And I said, really? And Greenfield in Brooklyn it's a whole factory. It's like totally, it's a complete thing. I don't know how many there are in this world anymore of what Greenfield actually has for so many years. I think that the 20s or the 30s, that building went up as a factory, and to this day, it's the same in Brooklyn. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I made you your suits for Wall Street.
Oh, wow.
Said, no, what are you talking about? He said, Alan Flusser told you he made the suits, right? And he told you that he made the suits upstairs. He didn't. He made them in Greenfield. And that's how I understood he could do it. This is many years later, but he could do it in 2 weeks. That's hand tailored.
That's wild. Martin Greenfield is a legend in his own right, too. I mean, he was a Holocaust survivor. He's been doing this.
Yes.
However many years. Wow.
But in 1987 or 88, I think it was 80, maybe it was 88 at that time, he was cutting Michael Douglas's suits.
Oh, that's so nutty. That's such a great story. Thank you for that. Well, now we know. I mean, we had a big response on the socials when I mentioned that we'll be speaking to you later today. I mean, countless people asked me about Wall Street, so we finally got that.
It is a really, really good film, and it's really a good film that's quite, I think, it's a film in a moment that I don't know, captured the time that we lived in. That was so true. And it didn't matter if you were in trading, or if you if you understood money, if you understood anything. The drama and the story and greed is good at that time was so much what we were all about.
Well, from Wall Street, I'm gonna have to flick over some of my favorite films, like Speed and Cliffhanger, obviously Basic Instinct, amongst many, because I realize that we've got you on a time. But can I just show you a clip?
Yeah, sure.
From a film that I think is one of the best intros to a character, and the costume has such a big part to play in this. Let's. Scorpion couple.
That's really still fabulous, isn't it? It's really incredible. Great. I have to say, it's really, really great. John Woo, man, I was so honored to be able to work with John Woo. He was such an amazing filmmaker, and I had always loved the films that he did in Hong Kong before he came to America. And the bad guy was always so fabulous. He was always, to me, he was always the good guy. He had that way about him, and in his storytelling, he made you fall in love with the bad guy. And I think we did. But in Face Off, you didn't know who was the bad guy, but they were both bad guys, but good guys also.
Such a great film.
Yeah,
Ken, you love this film.
Oh yeah. Quick question. The suits on this film, did you have them made by Dominic Girardi? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I assume he's retired at this point. He was big in the 90s.
He moved to Argentina.
Oh, really?
He had family in Argentina, and at a certain point, I think it was soon after Face Off. I could be wrong about that in terms of years, but I think it was soon after. It wasn't too much long that he moved to Argentina to be with his family, and his son still cut after he left, but Dominic was 1 in a million.
Yeah. I never heard that story. I was always wondering what happened to him. Hey.
Yep.
Well, fast forwarding, we've got 2002 and one of my favorite films. I don't think people really talk about this film enough. We've got Unfaithful with Richard Gere and Diane Lane.
It's a good film.
And maybe you could just talk about, well, Diane Lane's great in this, full stop. I mean, she wears this beautiful trench coat throughout the film, and it kind of flows in and out through the wind, and then she gets to reveal some leg that's very seductive, Olivia Martinez later on. But I mean, Richard Gere's there. Can you talk about perhaps maybe any fittings or anything like that with Richard and what he was like coming into this film?
Well, Adrian Lyne is a filmmaker I love working with Adrian. He was a spectacular director to collaborate with. We happen to actually have the same aesthetic sensibility from the beginning. And so the translation was always easy to understand. And what you see in the film, or how the film feels in terms of its aesthetic, particularly Unfaithful, more than, I would say, Basic Instinct. Not Basic Instinct, pardon me, Fatal Attraction. We didn't talk about Jacob's Ladder, but that's one of my favorites of Adrian's. That being said, the one thing about Unfaithful is everything that you see is everything that really kind of signifies what an Adrian Lyne film looks like. I can't really. There is a very realistic aesthetic that is fine. It is not average because of how it's put together and how it's shot and what he feels is what he wants to get out of the character, what he wants to get out of the scene. There is always a level of, you could always feel the body beneath the clothes, whatever it is that actually is layered on top of the skin. But you could always feel it. You could always feel the clothes. You could always feel the body. You could always feel a little bit of the skin. And it was never about being sexual. It was only about being, I guess, revealing the most that would entice you to, as the audience, to continue on and telling the story. Nothing was ever forced in a way that would feel unreal. If that was the case, it would never be accepted. So whether it be an older coat like we saw on Olivier, Olivier, pardon me. It's something that is a real item. It is a real item. I think that when we designed the film, there was something about the blue of there was something about blue, and I don't really remember, that was an indicator that there was a yearning. That's how I remember it. I don't remember why. I honestly don't at this time. And he wears a beautiful cerulean blue color scarf. She gives Richard a blue cashmere sweater. She wears a kind of bluish shirt, a longer shirt at the beginning of the film.
Right. Yeah.
There was, and I don't remember right now why we did this, but it was to indicate a yearning and an emptiness and a yearning.
Thank you. Well, that's pretty interesting. I mean, the Unfaithful, like you mentioned, is not like the sexiest film in the world. It doesn't have that kind of provoking sex appeal, but just like the close-up of them holding hands after she reads the Braille book and the hands both collapse and they just I'm just like, wow, you can actually feel the heat in those sort of moments, those sort of electric moments.
I agree, because Adrian is a director that is, I would always call him a humanistic director. There's always some real human quality that you kind of feel from him. There's not anything that, if he thinks something feels fake, he'll never include it in the film. It's in his understanding of what the human element and human desire is about.